Can we get our meeting started, folks? We're 5 minutes late, but we have a quorum now. Has the committee had a chance to review the minutes?
Yes.
And if so, are there any corrections or changes?
No.
Being none, can I have a motion to approve? By
Second.
Diane, second. All in favor? Thank you. Okay, our first and most important order of business this morning is SLAM and ONG's presentation concerning siting of the building on the property. Kemp,
All right,
it's all yours.
thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having us back. We're happy to be here to present to you our recommendation and the group's recommendation for a building siting and site planning approach for the project. And our objective today is to obtain an approval from this committee for the approach for the site planning so we can move into schematic design. Over the past 3 or 4 weeks, since we met with you last 2 weeks ago and obtained approval for the ed specs and or for the space program and ed spec modifications, prior to that we had been working with the design review group to further develop the site planning approach for a couple of different schemes, which you'll see in a minute, and just kind of dive into a variety of different ways we could approach putting a building on this site. And we brought a few of the models from our interview because some of them are still pertinent today, and just we thought it might be helpful to see it in 3 dimensions. Just as a reminder, first slide here, and I do have copies of the slide, but I'll hand them out afterwards so I'm not distracted. The existing building on the existing site, so we have the entrance from Mansfield out here. We come down into the site with the buses and the existing parking and parent drop-off loop. The orange shading represents the existing building. It's about 62,000 square feet, and we do have a few portables along the back. As everyone knows, the site tapers down toward the rear of the site, and the building is currently terraced into that site. Just a quick visual on not all of the studies that we've done over the past 6 or 8 weeks. These first 4 were the ones that we did for the interview through the design challenge. After these, we did a few variations on these. One was a variation on the campus, and then we got some feedback from the district that a split building was not of interest, so we then looked at bringing the ELP wing into a building up on the site. And it's very similar, this footprint is very similar to what you're going to see as a recommendation moving forward, but the building is organized slightly different than what this was. We also looked at a variety of different building configurations in different locations on the site as part of this process. So we have really thoroughly vetted all the potential options on how we might put a building on this site and keep an operational school at the same time. So I just wanted to add that as a visual just to let you know that we have done quite a bit of work. 2 finalist concepts kind of rose to the top. The town square has always been a contender ever since the interview. We have developed that over the past 6 or 8 weeks to add in classroom neighborhoods by grade level and kind of pod type orientation or organization within the building. And you can see the evidence of that here. That would represent a grade level pod of 4 classrooms. We've also been working with the site planner to make sure that the building is as far out of the wetland upland review area as possible. But there are some wetland issues back here to contend with. So I think most people are familiar with this arrangement, but I won't go into the details because I have the next slide and we'll go into it in detail. And then what we're calling Courtyard now. At one point, this was the cove, which you have the model there. And then it transformed through the process into what we call a compact courtyard, and it was quite compact, and then it kind of expanded a little bit as we went through the process, and we're now calling it the courtyard scheme. As you can see, it has a pretty substantial courtyard within the center of the building. Looking at Town Square a little bit in more detail, again, we have the main entrance off of Mansfield Avenue. And one thing that you're going to see that's common for both concepts is an early decision point once you come into the site. So as cars or buses come in, we're going to have a stop bar here and make a decision whether you're going to proceed to this direction or this direction. And this is the bus loop here. And this would be the parent drop-off loop here and in and out. There are more parking spaces represented in this graphic than are required by the space program or the ed spec. And so there is a potential that this portion of the parent drop-off might be truncated a little bit if we were to proceed with this, and you could get a little bit more green space that way. But by and large, we have one main entrance for this concept, and then we have a secondary entrance here for what we would call after-hours community use that would gain access to the cafeteria in this zone, and media center in this zone, and then the gymnasium in this zone. And so you could have access to all of those elements as a secondary entrance. But the one criteria that the design group developed for this was that we want to have one main entrance for both the K5 and ELP coming through right here, and then immediately have the administration of the building this way, and you either go this way for the K5 or you go this way for the ELP. And so you'll see that as a common thread throughout as well. This building is a single-story ELP wing, a single-story admin and gym and performing arts wing. However, this portion would be a tall single-story because those are large, big box spaces. And then a single-story about along this edge. And then the rear portion of the building, the C shape here, the backward C, is a two-story component, and the second story is on a lower level from this level. So you enter here, and there's a ramp internally to get down, and approximately this footprint is lower by about 8 feet from this entry level. And that's just working with the site topography and having the building work with that topography. Other key features for this arrangement are good visibility of the entire site from the administrative wing, good visibility for people coming into the site to see where the main entrance is, and I think it's very intuitive as you come onto the site and figure out where to go and what pieces are where. Playgrounds has a 2 to 5 grade playground over here and a K to 1 playground here and an ELP playground here, and this one actually respects the existing community playground that could remain in its current location. Taking a quick look at how that works on the site from a section perspective. So this is the entrance level parking, and as everyone knows, it continues to go uphill toward Mansfield Ave. The ELP wing would be a single-story wing here. Your entry level would be here, what we're calling zero elevation. And then you can see that the ELP wing is actually a little bit higher than the main entrance elevation, about 5 feet higher. And then, as I mentioned, the elevation for what we're calling the main level of the K5 wing is at -5 from that entry elevation. I think I said 8 before, it's actually 5. And then there's a 14-foot floor-to-floor for the lower level in the back. The courtyard in this scheme is actually at the lowest level, so it's a 2-story high courtyard within that space. And then as you get toward the rear of the site, it terraces down to the road. Any questions on that? So that's a quick overview of Town Square and how that lays into the site. You can see that the larger big box spaces are here, and admin and ELP are a single-story construction, and then this is the 2-story construction toward the back. One of the major considerations for both schemes is how are we going to build this and keep an operational school. That was one of the primary challenges for this effort. You can see the overlap here between the existing school and the proposed new school with the red outline. And as you can imagine, it has some challenges for phasing. We did look at phasing, and this is a summary slide of the phasing where we had an enabling project in the first summer, which would be this coming summer, 2020, that would do some partial demolition in this zone, and might be expanded to include more and try and build a larger portion in phase 1. but it would require a fair amount of portables. I think that was a key consideration, is because you would be displacing a lot of classrooms in the first phase of construction. And this represents 4 portable classroom buildings for a total of 8 classrooms being in portables, plus a couple additional here to kind of relocate some of the ones that are being removed in the back to this little courtyard here, and then adding new. And all of that comes with a cost. And it also comes with a cost both financially, and also comes with a cost for the experience of the students during that time. And there's traversing, outside to the main building as that goes forward. So, but it can be done. And we looked at this orange being phase 1, and that would be about a 12-month period. And then we go into phase 2, and after this piece is done, you built most of the new classrooms, so the students can then occupy those classrooms. And then you have a school, an operating school that's using this portion of the building and that portion of the building, while the remaining portion of the new building is being constructed. It does have a construction duration time associated with that, because it is a little bit more elongated in construction duration. So that was a consideration as well. But the plan was to get everyone moved in to the building by August 2022. Courtyard scheme. Any questions on the town square before we move on to the courtyard scheme?
I have one question. So in phase 1, as you're demoing the old part, are you leaving the gyms? Is that what the yellow to the left
Yes.
is?
This would be the lunchroom and the gym, and then a few classrooms in the 96 wing.
So the kids wouldn't be able to connect anymore, right? You'd be demoing that middle part. They'd have to come outside to go.
We would, yes, you'd be demoing any connection to this building. The path, you can kind of see it in the green. This would
Okay.
be the path.
That would be like an
There
exterior
would
wall.
probably still be an interior connection between the front building where administration would be located and the middle building where cafeteria and gym are located. That would still have its existing corridor.
In phase 1, which lasts a year, you have the portables, but as soon as you go to phase 2, you can remove those portables and bring them back.
We could
That's
potentially
correct.
remove some of them, yes. And you can see there's an overlap here with the new parking lot. So that new parking lot would have to be built probably in the second summer. We haven't sorted out all the nitty-gritty details of it, but that was the overall concept. And so you can see there's an overlap on those footprints, and the assumption was that they would be going away that summer because the students would then occupy them for the next school year.
And Kemp, what are the small portables in between?
They were the small existing portable. They were the same size footprint as that. So I think we currently have music and something else. I don't remember.
Instrumental music,
And world
language.
Yeah, and so that was kind of just taking
So
those,
it's up
whether
there.
it's the same building and moving it there, or getting another building of the same size, but a single classroom for each of those footprints. So you'd have 2 here, and then you had 8 up here, so for a total of 10.
Okay.
What are the risks that you couldn't complete that phase 1 in time for students to occupy the new classrooms by the beginning of school?
Did you say what are the risks?
Yeah. What is it?
There are a lot of risks with that, because the timing is critical. And again, we haven't sorted out all the nitty-gritty details of the schedule, but it would be a complicated, phased project. There's no question about it. Any other questions?
I'm sorry, I do have just one question, but it's going back. When with the plan, when it's completed in the town square, is the courtyard only accessible from the lower level classrooms from that academic wing in the C section? The classrooms that are...
And also from the library media center.
Okay. And then those lower level classrooms could walk out into the courtyard. Are they also, would the plan also be for them to be able to go out to the playgrounds as well? So
Yes.
they would have like an interior, exterior door and then also an exterior.
They could. I mean, that was yet to be discussed, but whether they have them out of their classroom or they come out, these stairwells are here and here, so they could probably.
Probably the end of the
exit through them.
corridors there,
Okay.
closest to the playgrounds.
But yes, that lowest level has got great access all the way around.
And then the upper level of academic classrooms, in order to access the courtyard, would go down a stairwell into the courtyard.
Not into the courtyard, but to get to the playgrounds, they would go down the stairwell and out the doors facing the playgrounds.
But if they wanted to go to the courtyard, they would go
They
down the
could do
stairs
that.
still? Okay.
Yes.
Am I correct, and I'm sorry, Kip, I just want to make sure the design meeting that the board was in, Town Square, regardless of how you feel about all the plans, optimizes the property and the building property. Is that for
It
putting
works.
the building in the most kind of optimal, with our setbacks and all of our,
I'm not sure I would use the word optimal, but it works very well with the existing topography. Yes, and I think the way we described it when we first presented it was that the reason the existing building is where it is because that's the best place to put a building on the site. And so we should look at putting a new building on that location. But it doesn't come without challenges when you're trying to keep an occupied school in operation on the site at the same time.
thank you.
One other thing I forgot to mention is that that's a key criteria that we'll see in a few minutes. Another aspect of the town square plan is that it's very respectful to its neighbors in the sense that we worked to put most of the building toward the rear of the site where you have open space here and because it's working with the topography, you don't have a building kind of rising too high or high above the grade adjacent to neighbors.
On that point though, Chip, Ken, why isn't the building as set back, I know we're not showing the courtyard yet, to the open space? In other words, the
You mean
8-foot perimeter.
Put
yeah.
this closer to
Do you mean the
setback?
ELP wing?
Even the whole building itself,
So we were trying
so there would be
to,
less overlap.
we
to
were
the
trying to
existing
maintain some space for these playgrounds as well as fire access around the building as well, even though we don't have a paved fire access, still want to maintain a reasonable width around that building.
Right,
How
and
would
also
you-
this would allow for no wetlands upland review. So there's a 50-foot offset from the wetlands that if you don't build in this
Right.
area, then it's easier to get through the regulatory process.
Yeah.
Again, where are our wetlands
Despite
here?
The wetlands are down along here.
Yeah, okay.
But for the ELP,
That
put the
could
playground be in the front.
theoretically come closer to the.
Could it be here? Sure, it could, and that could be a refinement during design.
And so
But
that,
we do like to use the building as a strategy, a design strategy. We tend to like to use the building as a protective device from parking and potential strangers coming out of the site
For the playground.
where the kids are at the playground. That was one reason why it's toward the rear.
I think it's also important to note that what we're trying to determine today, and I think what we're looking at, what we've been looking at the past 3 meetings, is trying to determine a site design strategy. And though we do have a building that's demonstrating the site design strategy, there's still a lot of potential changes that could happen to the program. There are a lot of weeks of building design, so this isn't a final design necessarily in either case, that it's more talking about the direction, though we had to really go into the building design in order to explore what works on the site. There's a lot of changes that may continue to take place in the design of the building itself. This is more of a site design strategy that we're trying to decide on today and evaluate.
And to that point about, why don't we tuck it closer into this corner, or closer to this edge? Some of that could happen, but as Amy mentioned, if we bring this building any closer to this edge, we get ourselves into more trouble with the wetland upland review area.
No, I was referring more to the open space.
And then if we take it this way, it doesn't really help the situation. We're still going to need to take down a similar, if not the same, amount of the existing building to build that piece. All right. Talk about Courtyard. So this one, and you'll see toward the end of the presentation that we have two building footprints for this concept. And that's, as Diane just mentioned, the building design phase is yet to come, and we will start to refine that building design with the group. So this is not set in stone, it's just a representational footprint. But this building, or this concept, puts the building on the majority of the existing open space. And it utilizes the MU zoning, as does the other for the setbacks, but this utilizes it also for the height of the building that's permitted through the MU zoning. And again, to be sensitive to the residential neighbors, one thing I wanted to mention about the cove was one of the original concepts that we presented during our interview, where we had a 3-story block here against the open space. Again, taking advantage of the MU zoning that permits a 3-story block. We had a dining space here, and we had the gym and some of the other community spaces here with the ELP wing extending here. This had problems because of the walk all the way around the building, so forth and so on. And so what Courtyard represents is very similar to this.
I put it over here. Let's put if we can, put this over here. So everyone can see it. Well, or bring the stand or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry. That way, the people who have to know can know.
So what Courtyard represents is very similar in the regard that it's a 3-story wing along this edge. But we put this piece here, which is a single-story wing for the ELP, and we took these larger big box spaces and put them here. So that's kind of the essential difference between this scheme and this scheme, where we have a single-story ELP wing along the immediate residential neighbor edge. We have a 2-story element here, which is a art on the main level, and then it's a 2-story media center. One portion of it at the main level and one portion of it at the lower level. And then we have a 3-story academic wing, which is accessed, the main level floor is the K and 1 grade. And the plan is that the lower level would be 2 and 3, and the upper level would be 4 and 5. This particular footprint is showing that neighborhood by grade level pods off of a spine corridor. We'd have K here, first grade here. And we do have loop circulation throughout the building. However, it can be controlled at the ELP wing on the backside, and well, on both sides. Again, as far as site planning arrangement, you had that decision point early, and you have parent drop-off and parking, and then bus drop-off and parking over here. We do have that one main entrance at the administration space, and you make a decision at that point to go either to the ALP wing or to the K5 facility. And then we also have that dismissal arrangement from the ELP here from the commons space, which was also a criteria. As I mentioned, the large big box spaces are taking residence here, where we have the gym and a cafe and some performing arts venues here, the music spaces primarily. On the site, we have potential for an outdoor dining space, and then we have our playgrounds along the edge here. And again, this is also terracing with the site. The main entrance is at what we're calling 0. I have a few sections we'll show in a minute, but that's at the main level of the upper parking. There is a grade transition of about 5 feet right through here, and so this is what I would call the next tier down plateau, and that the building also steps with the site. So there is a step in the building right here of that same 5 feet. And then we have, as we get outside, we have another grade step here to the playground level, and then another step here down to the open space. Now the courtyard, as you would imagine, because we have a 3-story wing here, the building is taking less area on the site. So we have greater open space in this concept. And this particular site will support a U10 soccer field along with all these playgrounds. Grade K1 playground here, 2-5 playground here, and then the ELP playground is associated with the ELP wing. One of the key features of this is the courtyard, and right now we see this as a two-tiered courtyard with kind of a elevation change here. So this upper portion of the courtyard is at the same level as the main entrance level of the building, and it's also at the same level as the ELP wing, so the ELP students will be able to experience this courtyard on the upper level, as well as be able to go out on this side, so you have that pass-through relationship with grade on the ELP wing. And then it terraces down within the courtyard to have this portion of the courtyard be even with the lower level. So you have that capability of having students from the lower level experience that courtyard as well. So it's a little bit better explained with this section, this being the ELP wing. You can see that we have a grade level relationship on both sides, this side being in the courtyard. This is yet to be designed, but there will, the plan is that there would be a terraced, some sort of a terraced design, and we're thinking that it could be an outdoor classroom, like an outdoor amphitheater type structure, down to the lower level of the courtyard to the 3-story academic wing. And everyone would enter at the main level. So we've had a lot of conversation about a 3-story academic wing. And we talked a lot about the fact that from an experiential standpoint of the students, depending on what grade level you're in, it would be a 2-story building experience because you're entering at the main level. And if you're in K in 1st grade, you're always on the main level. And if you're in 2nd or 3rd grade, you're entering the main level or going down 1 level. And if you're in 4th and 5th, you're entering at the main level and going up 1 level. So from the student perspective, it would be experienced as a 2-story building, but it's taking advantage of those MU zoning permissions for going to a 3-story. And I think it does a fantastic job with the courtyard has really kind of become this focal element within the design. Just taking another section through the gymnasium block just to see that relationship. As I mentioned, the entrance level is at what we're calling 0, and then it goes down 5 feet to the gym and dining and music space level. You come out onto the outdoor dining terrace. There's a slight grade change down to the playground level, and then there's another grade change down to the open space field level. And again, so this is also terracing down the site. And we were trying to be very respectful of the neighbors, as I mentioned, by keeping the single-story portion of the building here. This is slightly if I go back to this is slightly misrepresented. This back piece would not be a full 3-story. It would probably be more like that. So on the south edge of the site, this element is only a 2-story element. And it's this wing here that is 3 stories up against the open space. Again, looking at the overlap of this building with the existing and considering construction phasing and duration, we did look at phasing on this, but you can see the overlap is limited to these 2 legs of the existing building and some overlap on the existing parking, which is a little bit more easily managed than the other from a construction standpoint. You can see that even the phasing summary is simpler. But phase 1, enabling in phase 1 would be to remove some portion of the existing 96 wing, most likely up to that center corridor, and then an existing portion of another portion of the existing building on the next tier down, again back to that center corridor, so you can keep that main spine of circulation in the existing building during construction. And however, by taking these classrooms offline, we expect that there will be some level of portables as well. We were also indicating possibly some temporary parking toward the rear of the site during construction to compensate for taking this offline, that portion. We haven't done the full analysis on whether or not we would need a full 8 classrooms here. We're working on that. There may be some ability to consolidate within the existing building footprint for the duration of construction. But conceptually, this is what we're looking at for that. But what the advantage of this concept is that you can build the entire building in one construction phase. And then come back after the building is complete and the students are in this portion of the building, then the balance of the site will be completed after the rest of the existing building is demolished. So it's actually a three-phase project, whereas the previous one was more of a four-phase project. Phase one being demo and construction, and then it's a phase two versus two-phase versus three-phase. So phase one is constructing the whole building, phase two is finishing construction of the site.
Kemp, in this plan, because you would be building the new building where the open field is, and the playground, existing playground is on the other side of that, is that where you would sort of secure off the construction zone and the students would still come up to the front of the site and use that playground?
You're talking about the playgrounds over here?
Yeah. Just
We
because
would-
I see you have the portables on the back playground now,
Yes.
so I'm just curious what access they would have to playgrounds during this process.
Part of that enabling project may be to relocate those playgrounds, because we would not want the students going up
Okay.
over here. We would want to.
So you would expect
cordon
that
off
being
like that.
completely secure, not with, okay.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
That's
that's
a
another
great
piece to
point.
figure out then, is like where the children would have playground access.
Right,
Yeah.
they may, the temporary staff parking may actually slide, in my mind, it'd be easiest to slide that down and have playground associated kind of where it is today or in
Right,
that.
and then you have a closer adjacency.
There is a structured
Okay.
playground here currently, right?
Yeah,
and,
and also on the other end, there's
And
another.
over here,
Mhm.
right? So we have that one, and again, depending on how many portables we need,
Okay.
that may be able to stay.
Okay,
We just have to work out those details. It's a high-level concept.
okay.
But that's a good point, that one would have to be relocated.
Yeah, I understand all the
Otherwise, it's not
flexibles, the portables and the parking is flexible. I was just curious if the current built-in structure would be something that was accessible, but you're saying for safety, no, you would not.
Correct.
No,
That would be part of the construction zone.
Got it.
We'd cordon off something like that. So
Thank
this
you.
would all be construction, and this would be the educational offerings.
Outside of the phasing and the construction, do you have a plan that you think is optimal for the overall longevity of the school? Like, this is a better building. I mean, we're hoping this building lasts 50 years and the town's investing. So construction is kind of what we're working with, but at the end of the day, is there one plan that jumps out to SLAM as the best end product?
It's a great segue to the next series of slides.
So happy to say that.
So, give you the bucks later.
Can
So-
I ask another question about that?
Sure.
courtyard, though? I noticed that, and you mentioned the parking was 170 in
Yes.
the town square. This is 120.
120.
What would the impact, I mean, that's almost a 50% swing from 120
Well, I think the town square,
in this plan
right.
at 170.
The town square plan, we acknowledged that we were showing about 40 or 50 spaces more than the ed spec requires. And we had some criticism, or maybe not criticism, but comments back, that there was an awful lot of paved area in the town square.
So that would
plan,
come
so
down.
That
We
would come
would
down.
likely reduce that.
What would a building of this size typically need?
120 to 130 is right where we.
So the
usually
town
see it.
square is overdrawn
Yes.
in terms of impervious surface, if you will.
Right, and what was driving that was some of the queue length that was in the ed spec for parent drop-off primarily. And so there would be a slight concession on queue length of parent drop-off to reduce that parking.
But it would be no smaller than the courtyard.
Correct.
And speaking of queue line, do both plans allow for one bus queue? Today there's two, right?
In fact, it's two, when we go back to the plan. So both bus loops are of similar size, so I'll just use this site plan. This queue length will accommodate 8 buses, and then the plan is that the second wave of buses will queue up here, and so that parent activity can operate independent of buses being queued up.
Both plans are two
Both of them are planning on 2 waves. Yeah, so you have, in the dismissal arrangement, you have 8 buses lined up. They would load, then move out, and then the next wave would come in and load. In the arrival sequence, it's much more transient, so
They come in.
they just come in and drop and then move on.
Right.
And in this one, the ELP bus queue enters that right
So
stop?
as you get dropped off on the bus, your pedestrian path is here up to the main entrance.
Oh, they enter the other entrance.
You can go either way. So this could be an entrance right into the, say, the cafeteria zone of the building from the buses if that's desired. Some districts like to have students arrive at the cafeteria. If they're serving breakfast for some students, that may occur. Or if they're just trying to gather the students ahead of the start of school. So either way, it will work.
But the other plan has one entrance.
The other plan has 2 as well. We just didn't put a star.
Oh, it only
Probably
has one
should.
star. Oh,
It has a secondary entrance as well associated with the bus loop.
So I wonder if this is an appropriate time to have Dave Cravenzola speak briefly. He did a bit of an analysis on the portable needs for the courtyard design, just to be able to compare the 2 schemes with regard to the portable needs. I think that would be valuable.
Very briefly, and Luke and I spoke just before the meeting, and I know some things that just recently changed as far as an influx of some students, so we took the portion of the existing building where it would be displaced by the gymnasium and kitchen area, which is what we'd have to find swing space for them. We tried to shuffle those among that first building, and I think could be about six to 8 portables we may need, but it depends on, there's really a lot of things in play, right? Do you want the little kids who would be the kindergartners and first grade whose classrooms are in that first existing, the 96
They're here.
wing, right? But as Luke had mentioned, that a couple of rooms here that were dedicated, well, these are the 2 ELP, which those are likely able to be relocated out, right? Then there was a room here, right, that was a different function, but that's now been turned into a kindergarten.
That's going to be first grade, yeah.
First grade, and then this one here was something else that's going to be a kindergarten.
Correct.
Right? And the idea is to figure out a way to relocate these spaces. What we initially looked at is that because there's already a main entrance established here, we would take if we can't leave this portion of the main office on this side of the entry, we could swap it into this classroom so that there's still the first thing you encounter is the main office. Do we carve out some space in the gymnasium to move some of these functions? It's really a discussion that's got to be had with the school administration and the building committee as far as what we can jockey. But as far as the delineation of what would have to be allocated for a construction area, it's much cleaner, and you're putting far less effort into separating the occupied spaces from the construction spaces. So as far as maintaining a safe separation is fairly cut and dry in this scheme, if that addresses what you were talking about.
Yeah, certainly.
So I think it goes back to my question of overall end product, what's optimal, both educationally, which I guess the board and superintendent and the principal administration can weigh on, and what you think from an end product is the best, and then seemingly it's up to the board of ed to figure out how to make that work for you all.
Pass them those out. I'm going to take the time to pass these out now because I think it would be helpful for everybody to be able to look at these slides up close. And if you jump about 2/3 of the way into these, pass a few around over there.
There's a collection.
no.
Any more to go back?
Do you have enough?
So we spent an awful lot of time discussing exactly what you're alluding to, Cara, and ranking both concepts with respect to the criteria. We had 6 major headers, And there are three slides that go through this ranking. And you're going to find that from a building siting, building organization, how the building works from an educational standpoint and so forth, they're very close together. And then what really is separating the two concepts is the construction duration and cost. Location of building sensitive to neighbors, massing of building sensitive to neighbors, maximize play fields. I put an asterisk on the play field on the bottom. The courtyard does accommodate a larger field than the town square does. So you can have up to a U10 soccer field. And then building integrated into site topography. And we did some ranking of those sub-components and then got an overall ranking for building siting, and you can see they're very close together. Town square is probably like 0.2 of a point higher than courtyard. For those elements, site zoning, security, and monitoring, you can see they're all very in alignment with each other. The playground proximity to the play field is a little bit less optimal in the town square because you have those two playgrounds on either side of the academic wing down the hill from where the play field is, which is up to the top of the site. So you do have that long trek if you want to have that kind of connectivity to the play field. That's why we rank that as a 3 versus a 4. So you can see, again, they're very, very close together. We do have, just to go through the detail, we do have separate ELP K1 and 2.5 playgrounds. The building service is in a non-prominent location, so it's not in your face. We have that good sound separation of bus and parent vehicular as well as vehicular and pedestrian traffic in both concepts. Building use and operations, again, we spent a lot of time here. Both are equally ranked, and so this is kind of a neutral slide between the two concepts. But the points of interest were single point of main entry for K5 and ELP programs, both do that. Secondary entry for community spaces, both have that. Discharge from ELP common space is accommodated. Building design adaptable to class level neighborhoods. As you'll see in a minute, we have for Courtyard 2 footprints. The one that we've shown so far shows the pods off of a single corridor. Another one has a double loaded corridor, and you still have those neighborhoods, classroom neighborhoods, but they're off of a double loaded corridor. And that's yet to be designed. But both concepts will support both building design. Building design will provide an excellent educational experience. I'm confident that both, no matter what the organization may be, will provide an exceptional educational experience for the students. They both have an opportunity for outdoor dining space, an opportunity for outdoor classroom space, and an activated courtyard. But the courtyard scheme has a much more activated courtyard, much larger courtyard. I think will give you quite a few more opportunities than the town square courtyard will. Where really the two really started to separate was in some of the regulatory, construction phasing, and cost. And in the construction phasing category is the experience of the students in the existing building during construction. That's really part of that factor. So let's look at the regulatory first. It works within as of right zoning requirements. And I put an asterisk that both concepts are utilizing the MU zoning to different degrees. Town Square is using it for the setbacks, and Courtyard is using it for the setbacks as well as the 3-story. Wetland approval not required for building construction. Town Square, we think there's going to be some engagement of the Wetland Commission because of the proximity to the wetlands on the far end. So that ranked a little lower there. Courtyard does not have that because the building is up gradient on the site. And then special approvals not required. Special approvals being more of a site plan, planning and zoning approval. We felt Town Square did not have that as an encumbrance, but the Courtyard may because of that MU zoning and the height of the building is going to be a special approval by the Planning and Zoning Commission under the guidelines of the MU zone. So we rank that slightly lower, but you can see again, they're both very close on regulatory. It's really the construction phasing that's best to separate them, minimize the number of portables required. Town Square is going to require more than what we showed on the phasing plan. I'm confident of that. I think
I think you're right. I think the amount that we're talking about needing for the courtyard would be the amount, a similar number that we have to add onto what we already figured for the town square.
so upwards of 8,
6 to 8 more for town square.
6 to 8 more. Okay.
Yep, from what we were showing in the town square.
Okay. So that's just, it's
Wait a
just-
minute.
Wait,
Yeah.
let's do that again.
Yeah.
When you compare Courtyard to Town Square, the lower number of portables is in Courtyard.
Yes.
And you're saying that Town Square would be how many more than Courtyard?
It could be, depends on really how much of that, it really depends on, can we build that entire donut building in one, and how much we have to move out. It could be up to 12.
12 classrooms.
Probably 12 classrooms for the town square.
Yeah, and we're showing 10.
Okay.
So
So maybe
let's be
two-
clear,
2 or 3.
let's make sure that we're clear. We were showing 4 footprints, and each footprint represented 2 classrooms. And then we had 2 others,
Right.
Yeah.
so we had a total of 10.
You had 10.
But if we need 12, or maybe even 14, depending on how much, and maybe it makes sense to go back and just take a look at that, so everyone's clear.
Right. You had the 4, which are doubles.
Right, these are intended to be a total of 8 classrooms.
Right.
What's not shown here is potential for the restrooms. We need to consider the restroom component of this because there's so many classrooms and portables.
Yeah.
And then these 2. But one thing that maybe I didn't explain quite well enough is that dashed line there is the representation of the 2-story portion of the building relative to the single-story slab-on-grade portion of the building. And it can be done this way, it can be constructed that way, but it's going to require a lot of temporary enclosure to do that, which carries additional cost. And so what we were talking about most recently is how do we come up with a scheme to build this entire donut and have that be the temporary enclosure here at the junction between the gym and the donut. And that's going to require taking that many more classrooms offline initially, which will mean more portables.
And this is for 2 full academic years.
Correct. Yes.
Is that correct? I thought it was.
At least 1.5.
It's going to be all.
No, we're just reading off of here.
So, I mean, respectfully to Slam, and I know you've worked so hard on this, I see that you say that the educational experience is similar in either end product. Does administration feel the same way? That in both projects, the end product, the educational experience is similar?
Yeah, I mean, I've said before, I'm a bias against 3 floors. These will convince me of that. Just that's a main thing programmatically for me over time. I just think we need to be very clear with the town too, in the community of what that building can house in the future or not house in the future with the 3 building. It's good that it's on the same level. The Courtyard being bigger, I think is great because you tend to get a bigger use educationally of those spaces. The smaller, the less they'll look pretty big, the less you get use out of it. But my main thing is just those that are okay with that 3 building. I'm not a proponent at all 3 buildings for a long time.
3-story.
3-story building. And you have to be clear as to what you cannot use that building for in the future, right? In terms of what grade levels are allowed in there versus what aren't. So it will be capped, right? You won't be able to put like K2 through that building, right? You reschedule that. That's correct. So you just don't want the community to ask you later, can we actually redistrict or reschedule or do whatever? You just don't want to be caught like that.
Agreed.
That's all I'm saying.
With a 3-story arrangement, the upper level, if you were to reconfigure that building to a K2, K3, you would not be able to use the classrooms on the upper level for those grade levels. Correct.
Okay. If I'm reading this, in both drawings, the children and staff are in the new building August of 2022. in both,
Yes.
in the full building. The duration is the
No, it's not.
demolition.
No.
Not the ELP.
No,
Not
no,
it.
no, the
Not
town
really.
square, the town square project is like
K
an
through 5.
at least, that's like an 8-month longer project.
It says move into phase 2, August 2022. And the other one says move into new building, August 2022. So that's what, my confusion is, what's not, because there's nothing that says move into rest of building, January 2023. There's no,
Well, December 2022 is pointed out as phase 3.
that's parking and field. It doesn't say the building. So I'm just wondering, is the building available to the students and staff at
I
the
thought we
same
were building
time?
the ELP at the same time as, the L shape is going to be the second.
Well, but I think that's perhaps, but but turning over that phase 1, because remember, we're talking now, the way things are going with pre-construction design, we're not able to start construction until probably October of 2020. So
Mike, it says up there.
The August of 2021 is, for that first phase is,
That's for town.
You're saying that's not necessarily possible?
no. No, that's less than 10 months to build a 2-story building. I mean, that's
I have it.
So how long would the students be in quarters
2 years.
in the town square?
2 academic years.
2 academic years.
Yeah.
But,
was
but
what I
what
said.
students, is there a possibility that some students would be in a newly constructed portion of the building earlier than August 2022? Like, are we going to be able to get like a 4th and 5th grade class that wouldn't see the new building into the town square a year in advance?
I recall hearing.
I
Couldn't
really
you do a
think
half-year move?
we really have to, dive much deeper into the actual finding spaces for every room and what can be constructed and what can't. Is really,
But on this slide, under phase 1, the very last item says phase 2, construction of ELP. It's through November.
Right.
I mean, so it's past the August, which is the question Mike was pointing out. You're not all going to be in that building.
Well, ELP was always, yeah.
So I think my question is, I hear the theory, and trust me, I have it too, about portables, right? Having kids in portables and certainly a security problem there. And we'll talk generally about security if we need an executive session on it at some point. I'll defer to Kip on that. I will say, from a management standpoint and policy standpoint, 3 stories presents a different security issue overall in the long run for schools. And so that's why I'm trying to get at what's the end product that's optimal both educationally and making sure kids are secure. And then the administration can figure out how we live through that to get to that, because the school has got to serve students for 50 years. And or the town, should something happen and we all of a sudden we have this building that the town needs to utilize. So that's kind of, I think, if you're asking where the board would consider, and they're not all here, but what I would go back to them is, at the end of the day, the building committee has presented us with the best building to serve children for the longest period of time. That will be where the board is most interested as you guys make your decisions. And then on security, I do have some concerns about securing 3-story buildings around the schools. And so I will put it out as a general concern, and then we can talk about it privately if needed.
Are there options to?
If I can just, as a general overview, address the security concern of a 3-story building in use. In the past, in other schools, we have located administrative offices. We've decentralized the administrative offices so that perhaps a vice principal or, depending upon what you call your administrative people, maybe it's a dean of students or something, could have an office decentralized, one per floor, for example, so that there's always an administrator available to those grade levels. That's in addition to any of the security features that we would have through security cameras technology and being able to close and block off portions of the building. So certainly we would dive deep into that. If we move forward with this scheme, we certainly would keep that as a very important design.
That's what we did with the middle school.
You did, you
Yep,
decentralized.
the vice principal is up in the far corner.
Often that's a solution that works. Going back to Dr. Adley's concern about grade levels on different floors, we had not, during this conceptual design, we had not considered the building in a different grade configuration other than pre-K to 5. So that point is well taken. Though I don't know how to plan for that.
Is it possible to revisit the courtyard plan in a way that eliminates the 3-story and maybe utilizes some of the open space between the 2 wings? Is that something that we think even has the capacity?
Well, we did try to fit 2 stories, and then it usually impacted a greater portion of the existing building or the existing parking lot, and it also hurt the entry sequence. It made it, that the building became more sprawling and therefore difficult to fit in that area.
Well, we could certainly take a look at that. Some of the issues that we were wrestling with was when we were trying to fit a 2-story, it was more of an L-shaped wing on the academic wing. If we go to that plan. So in this zone, it was more of an L-shape here to become a 2-story wing. And
Then we had
then
trouble
you're
with
fighting,
site.
you're fighting with the site a little bit, and also you're fighting with getting light into the lower level on the inside because you've got the grade there.
Okay,
Those are some of the issues that we're wrestling with.
got it.
Well, I think you made a good point earlier, though. This operationally, this is a 2-story building.
Experientially, that's how the students will
So
experience
for
it, yes.
emergency exits and all that other stuff, no one's going more than 1 story up or down.
Correct. And so, for example, on the main entrance floor where you have your K and first graders, we would have, your exit would be through here or through here via ramps, so you don't have the stair issue, as well as we foresee an exit point over here up at grade level, on that main level grade level. Because there is a grade transition somewhere in here. It's not completely sorted out, but it is certainly will be designed where you can exit from this main level on the upper grade level. So you'd be exiting a grade on all sides of that main level.
Can we also talk about what potentials there might be for future expansion if it were necessary? Like how does the courtyard say, like, allow for us to be able to do that? Like, I think, Rusty, you had said the middle school was specifically designed with that ability. Is that a thought that's been put into this?
We have been considering future expansion. Part of what we've been talking about is the quantity of classrooms as well as the size of classrooms.
Mhm.
There's built-in capacity in the quantity and size of classrooms.
Right.
And then, we don't have it specifically identified here, but we could show where we can put a small addition on. Again, it's not sorted out here completely, but if we reorient some of these bars, I think we'd be able to tag on a couple of classrooms if
Okay.
necessary.
I have a question.
And one other thought I wanted, just to address the future use of the building in a reconfigured state. You could use this as a reconfigured K-2, even in a 3-story arrangement. What you'd have to do is add on some dedicated stairwells for those young kids up to the upper level. It's not ideal, but you could do that from a code perspective. Code states if you have dedicated stairs for that grade level, you can put them on a floor above
Second grade.
for second grade.
Second grade is allowed to be on a different floor per the code if they have a dedicated stair so that no other children are disturbing. It's not ideal.
It's not ideal.
Yeah,
but I
and
just
it
wanna
would
make
have
that
to
point.
be an addition at that time.
But to that point, though, in my lifetime, I'm certain some recall as well, Oxford has got a K-2.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Okay.
So it's just, it's an interesting point.
Yeah, I'm not aware of that.
Tara stepped out of the room. I don't know how long ago it switched, but it, you know, it has been.
We were here 15 years ago, at least.
15.
My daughter went to kindergarten at Oxford.
And then Royal.
To Royal.
Right. So I think that's
That only lasted 4 or 5 years, though.
Well, would the concern with the three-story building for the Board of Ed be more about the security or the long-term use of the building? I'm thinking if you can solve security problems, that's the more important issue. As long as I've been here, talking about moving from neighborhood schools has been kind of a third rail. So I don't see in the near future them going to a grade 2 school. So the security is more important.
Yeah, the security matter, we have, first of all, we have a specialist, D'Agostino, who will be the security expert. I've also asked Kevin Cunningham, who is a security expert, to come and advise the committee at an appropriate time. So we're going to be full bore into that. I mean, it's not a question that it's going to be sort of lightly treated. It's going to be very, very carefully treated.
And remember that our insurer, Kerma, offers that service as well.
Exactly.
So when you participate in this committee.
We'll have a full board presentation or discussion and investigation on the security issues. So I can't tell you I have the answers. I know that we're going to be addressing it.
Kemp, do you have other 3-story elementary schools in your portfolio?
We do. They tend to be in urban environments, but we do.
I have a, thank you, Katie, for your comment about the ability to add on space. We've all lived through extensive additions to our school buildings here, so I think that's going to be a critical element to be able to plan for additional space. I have a question on the open space field. You referenced that as being able to accommodate U10 soccer.
Mhm.
Is that a goal of this project, or is there an ability to utilize more of that open space if the outcome is better for the building itself?
That wasn't a stated goal in the ed spec. It's just our observation after doing the site planning that the courtyard scheme allowed for a larger open space. And so we wanted to quantify what that open space might allow for you for town use in the future, unrelated to the ed spec.
It was never a goal.
I would like to understand how the open space is currently used, and if an expansion of the open space is beneficial to the educational experience, or if both schemes really achieve both.
Your rating system doesn't seem to include operational costs. Is there a difference between the two buildings in terms of what it costs us to heat, clean, cool?
So
We haven't
gotten to that level of detail.
You're way ahead of us.
Mechanical or anything?
No, because we haven't even
Yeah.
done schematic designs yet. And the problem is, in trying to figure out the right siting, we've had to almost get into schematic designs and programming. We did the programming, but we're getting way ahead of ourselves in attempting to find the right location on the site. And the kind of questions that are being asked about security and everything else are really, they're down the road questions, and certainly operational questions, which is cheaper to run, or whatever. But to go back to what Jamie asked, the question, we only raised the question, well, how big is the field? Well, is it big enough for a soccer field? But that was only an incidental question was asked. We know that the only interest from the various town bodies that Randy Giraldo went to was if we could have a middle school size basketball court. That would be of great benefit to the YMCA apparently and their programs and others. Isn't that nice? But no one has expressed a strong interest in having a uniform regulation soccer field for any particular group. We just said, okay, how big is it?
Yeah, this will be something for the committee to look at the balance, but obviously in this courtyard design, you are impacting the neighbors in a different way than the town square scheme.
Mhm.
and you're acknowledging the ability to use the field for U10 soccer, which means a greater intensity of use of the outdoor space as well. So I think you have to look at the overall concept and impact to the neighborhood from both of those things.
I think your point is well taken as far as the fact that U10 soccer was not a requirement of the inspect.
Nor the committee.
Nor the
Well,
commission, which has
it's
pointed
just-
it out, that the width of the field will permit it, as opposed to town square where it's a much narrower field, but it's just an open play space primarily for the school.
I appreciate very much that you consider the town's use of that open space. But I think as you continue discussions, look at the overall impact of the siting and the intensity of use that those open spaces might ultimately facilitate.
On the open space, though, if you reduced, I'm looking at the town square, reduce it by 50 parking spaces, would that neutralize the,
Maybe from an
Yeah.
area perspective,
Space.
but the geometric configuration of the field would be more of an L
should might
shape.
achieve the area?
Right,
Yeah.
it's probably
Because
a
that's a big
similar amount
delta.
of green space, but it would be more of an L in shape, so it wouldn't accommodate.
Going back to the operational costs, the key is that both schemes are about the same square footage.
That's
And that's
correct.
really going to be the big determining factor of your operational costs.
Correct. Okay, so back to this slide. Just to finish the analysis. So I think we were on construction phasing and duration, and so minimizing the number of portables required, we kind of evaluated that. Courtyard is less, it will need some, but Courtyard is much less than Town Square. And that's directly related to the next bullet, which is minimizing the impact on student, faculty, educational environment during construction, which is a key factor. And Town Square is slightly more disruptive in that regard, so it's scored as a 2 versus a 3 for Courtyard. And then also minimizing the overall construction duration is also a key factor, simply to just minimize the disruption to the town and the operation of the school. Town Square is a longer duration project, so we'll have, it's scored slightly lower than Courtyard. Courtyard represents the most efficient means of doing the new school construction because it can be done in one phase. And then cost, there's also, in our preliminary cost estimates that ONG and P developed, again, based on same size building, different configuration, and different phasing requirements, we had about a $4 million differential, Courtyard being on the lower side of that range. And therefore, it's scored higher in the minimized overall project cost category. In summary, just pulled all the big bullets to one page to make it easier to see if we could have fit line through this group. It would score in the near 3.5 to below 4, or 3.75 versus fit line would be on the high side of 3.3 or so. And so Courtyard essentially wins when you factor all these components together, and we feel it's a good approach for this project from all those criteria perspectives. And as I mentioned earlier, either building experience, quality of education for the students is going to be on par with each other. So I put a check mark on the Courtyard, and as I mentioned, we do have 2 concepts currently with 3-story wing on this bar, one being a central corridor, double loaded type corridor with classroom neighborhoods as you go down the corridor, and then being explored doing that pod arrangement like we had for the town square, just to see if it was possible. How this takes shape in the design of the building is still yet to come. This decision in this meeting is more about the siting, where we put the building. I think Katie made a great point. Can we somehow get a two-story wing that maybe does an L shape? Again, the problem, we did look at that, if you recall, and the problem with that is you're fighting with grade and you end up putting a large retaining wall along here to allow that light to get into the lower level. And that's where it starts to push the cost, and it's less than ideal in that regard.
Kim, what is the height of the 3-story?
It's about 42 feet from the lowest point in grade. We're basing it on
12-foot floor to floor, I'm sorry, 14-foot floor to floor. So above grade, it would look like about 30 feet.
But by building code, 42.
Well, by zoning code, we still need to do the analysis of what
Correct.
the average grade will be around the building, because this is built into the grade bit, so I think it may not be that full 42 feet above grade. I don't know where it's going to be, but I think it's going to be slightly lower than that.
It's only above 30.
Do they count peaked roofs or no?
Well, the MU zone does have a provision to peak out at 45 feet to the highest point of the roof. That's one of the options.
Okay.
And
So we would do a flat roof in the portion that's
that's
3
why
stories.
we're showing a flat roof here, because if we added a peak to this, we're just worsening our issue.
Just lower those eaves on it.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't go to the midline in the MU zone.
Oh, they don't
It
use the
goes to
midline.
the top of the roof, the highest point of the roof.
But above 30 or 35, we're relying on the commission to say that's okay, or double the setbacks.
That's
Doubling the
correct.
setbacks is an option, and
But we're relying on that.
yes, but I think we're going to rely on option B, which would be special approval by the commission based on the specific organization of this building. And the way I was viewing it was the setbacks on these 3 sides,
Could be doubled.
or even all the way around, can be doubled. It's this front setback that, if we were to double that front setback, we'd be in jeopardy. We couldn't make that work.
Right.
But that would be the argument to the planning and zoning commission, would be that, you know, we can double the setbacks all the way on all other sides. And by the way, this 3-story wing is abutting open space. So, you know, that would be the argument. And we're still within their max limit, or lower than their max limit.
But a risk of,
But there is some regulatory hurdle to overcome with that. But on the flip side, the other one has a level of regulatory hurdle as well.
So I think it's important too to go back to my earlier point of considering this as a choice about site design strategy. And I think we're faced with trying to find space for a new building that encompasses not only what's being the K through 5 school that's on the property, but the addition of this new ELP wing that isn't there right now, and trying to keep the school in operation while building this pretty large facility. And I think it sort of comes down to 2 things, which is where these 2 schemes are. And one is that you start the building in the lower part of the property and build up, or you start the building in the upper part of the property and build down. And the upper part of the property has more space, so that's lending to a strategy that is less, has less phases and has less challenges to the school during the duration of the construction, and comes, we haven't really talked about that much, but comes with less cost as well. There's a significant cost difference to building more of the building at the onset by starting at the top of the property versus starting in the lower part of the property. So I think it's maybe looking at a decision between those 2 and how much overlap, how much of the building we take down. You know, 3-story is really going to be a problem for us, looking at maybe doing it 2-story or looking at 3-story only in part, or studying that a little more carefully and the challenges to that. Because what grows into the middle of the property can really change in either case. And though we've there is a challenge to try and, I know with the Courtyard scheme, putting the big box spaces in the middle of the property seemed to be the right solution, and you've gone through a number of iterations. But I think just kind of taking a step back and looking at it as kind of a decision of starting on one side and building up, which is more complicated construction, more phasing, and a little more expensive versus building at the top of the property and building down. So I think that's another way to look at it without trying to get too entrenched in these two particular designs, which may end up where we are. Those might be the best solutions, but I think clearly we're finding, like what Katie suggested, there are ways to consider variations on what you have here. So.
And I think I gotta be careful because I gotta go deal with Dean when we get back, but I think there may be an option to look at a two-story L-shaped academic wing with this siding configuration. It will require some additional retainage of grade on the south side, but with the larger courtyard, and we're already sculpting that courtyard down to the lower level on at least this edge, if not coming around, that may help rectify some of those issues that we were wrestling with an earlier concept.
Right.
To Diane's
To
point.
speak, and I don't want to speak for Dean, but I will say that Dave is probably thinking, and correct me if I'm wrong, that if we do start manipulating to make that a two-story area where we go down in a high point of the site, there is a cost associated with that. I don't know, how that.
Right, that's a determination we'll have to make, like, do we want 3 stories at a lower cost, do we want 2 stories at a higher?
Yes.
And also, to the credit of this Courtyard design, I think going in the direction of creating this 3-story building, which I agree, we have to continue to think it is a 3-story building, yet it's experientially a 2-story building with, entering on the main floor, going up one floor, down another. That really opens up possibilities for tremendous courtyard experience that is going to make this a really special place to learn. And it creates, I think, a way more efficient building from probably an operations point of view because of the tightness of the plan. I mean, start looking at these 2 plans in comparison. The town square really spreads out, and the courtyard is very effective with more of a core that center hub with things coming off of it. So I would argue that the challenges managed in the courtyard scheme create a very potentially more efficient and more operationally efficient building, and one that really allows a lot more use of the open space on the property. Again, keeping in mind we're putting a lot of program into this property, and the courtyard scheme really allows the site to continue to be a really wonderful, useful space. So I wouldn't.
That's a really interesting point, just in terms of like making a siting decision, because one of the challenges of the existing facility is its sprawling nature. It really takes quite a bit of time to get from point A to point B, and it is something of a labyrinth. So that's an interesting point in just about, in a building on the existing site, a challenge that we face daily.
And
It would
agree
be
with you.
similar.
From a student walking path perspective in the building, this is your circulation right here, just like that. And you have that one destination for art and/or media center. So if you're in academic wing, you're going like that to get to those spaces, or if you're in the academic wing, you're going like that to get to the dining or the music spaces. And it's very efficient. Yes, you're going up and down, but again, we said up and down only 1 floor for depending on what grade level you're in. Here, you do have a loop circulation throughout, and then your destination spaces are over here. So there is a longer walk, especially for the students that are on the lower level. They come up and then go down 4 different spaces. So all of that needs to be considered, and I agree with you that the compactness of the courtyard is an advantage in that regard.
Can't get away from that word.
Well, got to make a decision, guys.
Before we do that, to Diane's point, would you have more of that information at this juncture in your experience?
More
Of
What
the,
information?
we need to look at an alternative two-story courtyard. We need to look at the operational costs. We need to look at, I mean, I almost feel we're premature in making that decision without some of that additional
I
insight.
mean, as Kip mentioned, we've taken, as I described it to the team the other day, if this is conceptual design and schematic design endpoint is over here, from a building design, we're about halfway through schematic. We've looked at a lot of building layouts and configurations, but we need to get that decision on the basic siting and building to be able to continue and fully develop one schematic design and not have to develop two. fully
As far as
schematic design.
operational cost, there is some advantage to the compact nature of the courtyard building. I agree with Diane, and certainly less roof area. The skin is probably similar because a portion of it is 3 stories. So, you're not, and the square footage of the building is the same, but both buildings will be designed with the best practices as far as sustainability. It's required to meet LEED Silver. We usually strive to meet LEED Gold as a practice, but the state will require LEED Silver. So either way, I'm not concerned about the day-to-day operations and the efficiency of the building, because I think that that's something that we really put on the forefront of our design. So if we can take that off of the decision-making, I think that they'll be equal.
So one thing to note on here is this was an earlier scheme, you can see the date here, August 1st, of the courtyard, where this is the 3-story wing. And in this concept, the floor plans, and we purposely didn't want to get into debating the individual floor plans on this. We wanted to talk about siding today. But there were some performing arts spaces in this knuckle, which in this later scheme has moved into this bar of the building, which I feel is more successful. And that's part of what allowed us to be able to break down that academic bar into pods and have these individual pods. However, I think there is some middle ground between these two that may allow us to keep this portion in a scheme that's more like that. And you can see that there's some impact to the site to do that. You can see that there's slight subtle changes to this bus loop and to this amount of spaces over here. You can see that they got a little bit smaller because not only did this piece change, but the ELP wing came further north, which I think was also a positive step. And it impacted this a little bit. So there's, as we go through schematic, there's going to be these subtle tweaks and tugs and nips and tucks as we go through. And but by moving those performing arts spaces here, I think it's going to enable us to take a harder look at an L-shaped 2-story academic wing. I think we can look at that very closely, and at risk of saying it's possible.
Yeah. Well, I hear subtle changes, and then the need to look at a 2-story configuration. That, to me, is not. I mean, maybe it is subtle by your standards, but when you mention the grade and looking in.
Yeah, well, as I mentioned earlier, it's going to require us to retain more grade further back on the site. So it does have some cost impact. It does have some
cost.
Right.
But I don't think that we're tied to either of those things by choosing this site, is the
I
point,
agree.
is that we
That's
have
right.
options
We still
that
can-
we can evaluate at a later
It's a
date.
decision that can continue to evolve.
Correct. I think today it's more about siting of the building, and the building is going to change as we move forward. And if that's, if the commission or the committee directs us to look harder at a 2-story scheme, we'll certainly do that.
And I'd like to just, Randy Giraldi's not here today, and I spoke with him this week, and I just wanted to include 2 comments he made to me when we spoke about these schemes, and I think it was more as a parent. And the first was kind of just thinking about where would I want my kids on the site to be sitting in a classroom, and he was like, wow, I don't know that I want them sitting down at the bottom of the hill he kind of saw the higher ground of the Courtyard scheme as a place where he would imagine it would be a nicer place for a child to just literally sit in a classroom, which I thought was a different way of looking at it that we hadn't discussed in our meetings. And then the second comment he made was, again, as a parent, was he was concerned about the experience of his children through this 2+ year duration of construction, and a simpler construction where it could be built more in one time and leave the school more or less intact had a lot of importance for him with children in the school at this point. So I just want to put that out there. I thought that was interesting.
I have a question which probably was answered a long time ago, I'm sorry, but in all cases, the ELP wing is 1 story.
Yes.
Is that necessary?
Yes.
We have to segregate entirely the ELP experience from the rest of the school. Is that the intent?
Yes. And that's part of the ed spec, as well as driven by building codes.
Well, my opinion is that the construction risk in doing a town square is high. We don't know what it is, but I know that ONG and AP will have to put something in their numbers to compensate for that risk. And the phasing is longer. It's got to be more expensive, and I'm thinking of expense here, and it's disruption to the school and the students and the teachers and the parents. I think it doesn't make sense given the alternative, which is to build on the upper portion, and we can look at 2-story, 3-story, whatever. I just think we have to make a decision and move on. And for me, cost, phasing, and building risk is what drives my thinking to say, let's do the Courtyard. That's my point of view.
And I think the Courtyard, just from the discussions that we've had today and looking at the 2 options, offer us the more flexibility, far more flexibility than the other alternative to do some of these things that have come up today.
Yep.
And if we just go with the basic site, there it is, pick one or the other, they're the same, we have a much better, we'll have a much better end result for the school that delivers from a scholastic point of view than the other one.
So as a committee, are we prepared to make a recommendation?
I motion that the committee select the Courtyard basic design to move forward into schematics with.
Is there a second for the
Yeah,
motion?
I'll second the motion.
Is there any discussion? Being none, all in favor? Opposed?
I feel like Dean, but
It's okay. The motion is carried. Very good. Thank you. I had next on the agenda the review of the construction schedule, but I think, Dave, that's going to probably, we should look at that after you have a chance to look. Okay,
Yeah,
yeah,
we hit a milestone today, right?
Right.
Making a decision today so that schematic design could commence. So that was really the main date we were tracking, and the other one, it's just somewhere on the forefront is the commissioning agent. Is really the only, contracting issue that we're tracking is coming up soon. So as long as that's moving along in some fashion, there are no real schedule concerns we need to discuss today.
Commissioning agent, RFP, out.
yeah, it's out. So that should be done very shortly.
Do we know, so that's on the street?
It's on the street, we should be
Kate.
voting on it the next meeting.
It's been on our website since Monday or Tuesday. It's been on the DAS Biznet site since it was Tuesday. And the ad is in the newspaper today, so it's out there.
So we'll vote on it. They're due
September 3rd.
September 3rd, we vote on it on the 5th.
Great.
On August 5th, the Board of Selectmen voted to increase the size of the committee to 10 full members. And the Board of Selectmen also appointed Sean Brown and Nick Rongo to fill those vacancies created by the expansion. Neither gentleman are here today. They're both on vacation. Hopefully they'll be with us on September 5th. They both have strong construction management background and experience, and we'll be needing that when we enter the construction phase. So on the seventh item on our agenda, we talk about the commissioning agent. We just talked about that. We did talk with Jennifer Jurisky last time about the process to pay invoices and get record approvals. We're still working on that. And we'll be back to the committee as to what recommendations we have in terms of pay levels, payment amount levels, and who will be approving, so that we all know how to get invoices approved as quickly as possible and paid.
Include change orders in that?
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. And other than that, is there any other business that anybody would like to bring up for the? Yes.
Luke and I have been discussing the idea of updating the parent body at Oxbridge, which is certainly something at the forefront of everyone's minds. And he had suggested that we might use one of the bulletin boards at the front of the school to sort of provide a visual update about what is going on. So I just wanted to bring to the committee the idea of possibly arranging that bulletin board as a timeline of sorts, sort of who we are, who we've selected to design the building, what has been accomplished. And then, although we're very fluid in still determining what is coming next, I do think that that's a very key question to the parents. So I just would like to propose the idea to the board to make sure that we're all comfortable with information being posted publicly about.
The timeline that Mike Lynch put together, we talked about it after your request came in yesterday, and we're going to update that through today.
Great.
And get it in a format that can be easily printed on 8.5 by 11 paper, and then we'll get it out to everybody.
If I could recommend that maybe a brief report, ask to give a brief report at your first PTO meeting, and then at open house, maybe there could be information available.
So perfect segue. My second point was that the Oxford PTO would also like to invite the building committee to come and speak at our first PTO meeting. And it doesn't need to be.
There he is, right there.
It doesn't need to be a
Where's
big
Duke when you
committee
need him?
member. It certainly doesn't, even if there were just a couple of people that could show up to, again, go through the timeline, answer questions. That point, I think that it would be very well received by the parent body.
Keep us informed.
October 2nd.
Uh-oh.
October 2nd would be great, yes. And then Kemp, would it be okay with you if we used your company logo on the bulletin board?
Sure. Yeah. And we can provide you with some graphics
That would be-
as approved by the committee.
I was so hoping you would offer that. Thank you.
Is that it?
Yes.
One thing I wanted to add to the committee is the website we talked about last time.
Yes.
The application's been put in internally, and it should be set up by the end of this week, if not.
Yeah, I
beginning of
had
next.
some questions from Eric yesterday, so I believe he either had it completed by the end of yesterday, or when we go back to the office today, I'll be able to start uploading all the previous information and
So
presentations.
Keep an eye on your email.
Mhm.
Or
Okay.
an email from Eric Case
And one
from our office.
clarification on that, is that going to be a website that would be private amongst the
Yes.
committee?
Mhm.
Would there be a public component to that at all?
We can do a public page, yes.
My thought was that it would be really great on the bulletin board to provide QR codes to the town website.
Mhm.
And then I just think that those are great ways for parents to know and easily access what we've already put out there publicly.
Yeah, and we've talked about, we can either provide a public page on the website that we're going to share with you later, or we can just provide whatever graphics you'd like from us to become public, we can provide to the town as a PDF or a slideshow, so that it can be on a link on your own website.
That would be fantastic to have a
link
distinction.
to a public page that you're hosting rather than you having to continue to send us updates for us to upload.
Sure.
So,
That's,
contact
that
us.
makes sense, sure.
Yeah, if you send us the link, we can put it on our website.
Yes, would you make sure that Kate is informed about that?
Sure.
So again, keep your eyes open for an email from Eric Case from our office, and that will have your login information for the website.
Great.
Thank you.
Anything else? Yes, sir.
I just probably have to talk offline, perhaps to yourself, about the modification to the ed specs that needs approval in the Board of Education. So I need to sort of, I just need to talk to somebody
Sure.
to get the language of that. Because that's the August 2017.
Right.
So that's, I need to have that ready to go, but I think it's
Okay.
so I just need to know what that format's going to be, so. If you guys talk to, that's fine. But
In other words, it's the specifics for the motion, or
Yes.
the recommendation.
Yes.
Okay.
And what will fall out of that, natural discretion from the board, what that motion says.
Right.
So I do have copies. I think I only have 6 copies, but I have something that I can share with you that shows specifically changes from during the programming phase, the changes that were developed as a part of the programming phase from the original ed spec to the final program. And so, at least in, in this format, we have it, it will need to be developed into, sort of paragraph form, but I do have a quantity takeoff and a
Yeah,
list of those spaces.
We had that, we went through that last time.
You
Correct.
did, yeah, this is really literally what Kemp presented to you
Right.
on August 1st, but.
So we just had to figure out, if you want that in Word form, or just want it as a document to say permitted.
But we can talk, I can talk
Okay.
about both of them, that's fine.
Sure.
Okay.
But that's required by the state anyway, right?
Understood,
Correct.
yes, it is.
Yep.
Yep, and we were gonna maybe spend a few minutes afterwards just
Yes.
talking about next steps for
Right.
that state process.
Any more business? Motion to adjourn? Rusty, second. All in favor?